I had been on the road for 14 hours straight, pushing to meet a tight deadline. I was dead tired, but determined to make it through the night. My truck was running low on fuel, so I pulled into a small, dimly lit truck stop near mile marker 13. It was one of those forgotten places, tucked into the woods with one flickering neon sign above the diner. The place felt wrong, like it hadn't been touched by anyone in years. As I parked and stepped out, I noticed something strange. There were no other trucks, no cars, no people. Only the thick mist creeping through the lot and a heavy stillness that pressed against my chest. I walked toward the diner, hoping to grab a cup of coffee to jolt myself awake. The door creaked as I entered, and the smell hit me. Stale food, rotten meat, and something else I couldn't place. The counter was empty, and the chairs looked like they hadn't been moved in decades. But the thing that sent a chill through my spine was the man standing at the far end of the diner, staring out the window. I called out, but he didn't respond, just stood there, unmoving. His figure was distorted in the reflection of the window, like he was made of smoke. I walked closer, trying to get his attention, but as I neared him, the air turned cold, unnaturally cold. My breath fogged in front of me, and a creeping dread gripped my gut. Suddenly he turned. His face wasn't human, it was stretched, elongated, the eyes black voids. His mouth slowly opened into an unnatural wide grin, and from the darkness of his throat came a whisper, low and guttural. "You're not supposed to be here." I bolted for the door, heart pounding, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I revved the engine and peeled out of the lot, I looked back through my side mirror. The man was standing in the middle of the road, his hollow eyes locked onto mine, watching as I fled. I never went back to that stretch of highway again. I'd been hauling a late-night shipment through the Arizona desert, nothing but flat land and a starless sky for miles. After a while, the loneliness sets in. So when I pulled into a small truck stop and saw a young guy thumbing for a ride, I figured some company would help keep me awake. I rolled down my window. He looked tired, worn, maybe a little desperate. "Need a lift?" I asked. He nodded, not saying much, and climbed into the cab. He sat stiffly, staring straight ahead. I tried making conversation, asking where he was headed, but he gave short, one-word answers. I figured he was just exhausted, so I let it go and focused on the road. After about 20 minutes of silence, I noticed something strange. In my peripheral vision, he seemed off. His figure blurred slightly whenever I looked away, like he wasn't really there. My chest tightened and my hands gripped the wheel harder. I glanced at him fully, but his face was blank, expressionless. His eyes stared straight ahead, but they didn't move, didn't blink. I pulled over, trying to keep my cool. "Hey buddy, I think this is where you get off." No response. I turned to face him fully, and what I saw made my blood run cold. His eyes were gone, just dark, empty sockets. His skin had turned pale, almost translucent, and his body was slumping like a puppet with its strings cut. I threw open the door and jumped out trembling. As I looked back, the passenger seat was empty. I could have sworn I saw something, some dark, shapeless figure standing in the distance, watching me from the edge of the desert. I got back in and floored it, driving until dawn. When I told the story to an old-timer at the next stop, his face turned serious. "You gave a ride to the restless passenger. They say he died on that road decades ago, still looking for someone to take him home." I've been driving long enough to know when something's off, and that night, something was definitely off. I was on the outskirts of a town I'd never heard of, and my GPS had glitched, rerouting me to a truck stop I didn't recognize. It was late, and I needed to stop, so I pulled in. The place was a ghost town. A couple of trucks sat idle in the lot, but no lights were on in the diner or the store. Still, I figured I'd stretch my legs and maybe check my route. As I got out of the truck, I noticed a strange noise, a low, rhythmic hum, almost like a chant, coming from somewhere nearby. It was barely audible, but it set me on edge. I walked toward the noise, around the back of the diner, where I found an old, boarded-up well. The sound was coming from deep inside it, a hollow, eerie vibration. I leaned closer, and that's when I saw them, shadows, moving unnaturally, slithering like snakes, crawling out of the well. My breath caught in my throat as they stretched along the ground toward me, moving with purpose like they were alive. Panicking, I backed away, but the shadows followed, creeping faster now, stretching toward my feet. I bolted, but they were everywhere, rising from the ground, licking at my heels, pulling at my legs. I could feel them, cold, clammy fingers, invisible hands trying to drag me down into the earth. I barely made it back to my truck, slamming the door just as the shadows reached the cab. For a moment, they pressed against the windows, writhing and twisting, and then they disappeared, sinking back into the darkness beneath the ground. I didn't stop driving until I was far away from that cursed place. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that same low hum, and I know the shadows beneath are still out there, waiting. It was a lonely, foggy night, and I was exhausted after driving for hours. I stopped at a truck stop on Route 66, one of those places in the middle of nowhere. The lot was almost empty except for a few trucks parked along the edge of the diner. As I filled up my tank, I noticed a woman standing by the road, drenched in the mist. She didn't seem to be trying to flag anyone down, but something about her felt off. My instincts told me to keep driving, but I couldn't just leave her there. I rolled down my window. "Need a ride?" Without a word, she nodded and climbed into the cab. Her clothes were outdated, like something out of the 70s, and her face was pale as though she'd been standing out there for hours. We drove in silence for miles. I tried making small talk, but she never responded, only stared out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. Suddenly, my CB radio crackled. A deep, distorted voice came through, one that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "You shouldn't have picked her up." I slammed on the brakes. My heart raced, and I looked over at her, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty, the door hadn't opened, and there was no sign of her. When I reached the next truck stop, I found an old-timer at the counter. I described the woman I picked up, and his face went pale. "That's Sarah. She died in a car crash on this stretch of road over 40 years ago." I'd been hearing strange stories about a truck stop deep in the Colorado Rockies, rumors of drivers who went in and never came out, but I chalked it up to campfire tales until I had to take a route straight through that mountain pass. By the time I reached the truck stop, my gas was almost on E and I needed a break. The place was old, run down, and eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered and the few people there didn't speak, just watched me with hollow eyes. I filled my tank and went inside to grab some coffee. The woman behind the counter stared at me without blinking. "You're staying the night, aren't you?" she asked in a monotone voice. "I'm just passing through," I said, my voice shaky. But she smiled a cold, dead smile. No one just passes through. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. Symbols carved into the floor, faint but unmistakable. They were everywhere. On the doors, the tables, even the walls. My heart pounded as I rushed out, but when I got to my truck, I saw them there too, scratched into the metal like someone had marked me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw the people from inside moving slowly toward me. No longer passive, they were chanting something I couldn't understand. I slammed my door and floored it, not looking back until I was miles down the road. The next day, I tried to find that truck stop again, but it was gone, like it never existed. Like it never. I was running late, so I decided to stop at a small, out-of-the-way truck stop I'd never been to before. It was a simple place, a gas pump, a diner, and a row of old, unmaintained motel rooms behind it. I paid for gas inside the diner, where a tired-looking waitress gave me the keys to a room for the night. I wasn't expecting much, but when I opened the door, the place reeked of mold and old wood. It looked like no one had stayed there for years. Still, I was exhausted and laid down on the sagging mattress. I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I'd hear what sounded like scratching on the walls or tapping at the window. But when I checked, there was nothing. Just shadows outside and the wind against the glass. At around 3 a.m. I heard a loud from the window. This time I got up and pulled back the curtain and froze. Standing outside, mere inches from the glass, was a man. His face was pale and bloated, his eyes unnaturally wide, and his mouth was stretched into a sickening grin. I stumbled back, heart racing, but he didn't move. He just kept staring. I grabbed my keys, ran out to my truck, and peeled out of the lot as fast as I could. The next day, when I reported the incident to the local police, they gave me a strange look. "That truck stop closed down years ago," the officer said, after a trucker was found dead in one of the rooms. "They say he still haunts the place, looking for company." I'd been on the road for 16 hours straight, my eyes burning from staring at the asphalt. The clock on my dashboard blinked 2:47 a.m. when I pulled into the truck stop. The neon sign buzzed above, casting a sickly glow over the empty parking lot. I was the only rig there, at least I thought so. I got out, stretched, and noticed something odd. A figure stood by the gas pumps, completely still, staring straight at me. I called out, but they didn't move. No answer. I figured it was just a driver having a smoke or someone waiting for a ride. After refueling, I made my way inside to grab coffee. The guy behind the counter looked tired, uninterested in small talk. As I paid, I mentioned the person outside. He looked at me, pale and wide-eyed. "You saw him?" I nodded, confused. "Yeah, just standing by the pumps." "Man, they found a body there last week. No one's supposed to be out there. I haven't seen anyone but you all night." When I turned back to the door, the figure was gone. Truckers talk, and I'd heard rumors about this particular stop off I-90. They said weird things happened here, but I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. I rolled in around midnight. The lot was almost full, but I found a space near the edge. I was just starting to doze off when I heard a knock on my sleeper cab. I ignored it at first, figuring someone was drunk or messing around. Then came another knock, louder this time. I got up, grabbed a wrench, and opened the curtain to the front cab. No one was there. I locked the door again, double-checked the windows. Maybe it was my imagination. A few minutes later, the knocking started again. Harder now, almost frantic. I whipped open the curtain, but the lot was empty, and the streetlights flickered eerily. Suddenly, my door handle rattled violently. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I stared in horror as the door, which I knew I had locked, slowly creaked open, revealing nothing, just darkness. I didn't wait. I threw the rig in gear and took off, the door still swinging open as I hit the highway. It was supposed to be a quick pit stop, a place to stretch my legs, get some fuel, maybe a quick snack before I got back on the road. But something about this truck stop felt off from the moment I pulled in. The lights were dim, barely enough to see, and the few people hanging around looked wrong. Disheveled, jittery, avoiding eye contact. I paid no mind until I stepped inside. There was no clerk, just an empty counter, and a radio playing static in the background. I wandered around, feeling uneasy when I heard voices behind me, muffled whispers like they were just out of earshot, speaking a language I couldn't understand. I turned, but no one was there. I hurried back to my rig, anxious to leave. But when I started driving, my GPS took me down a road I didn't recognize. I'd driven this route dozens of times, but this was different. No lights, no signs. Just darkness, with tall trees looming on either side. I tried turning around, but every road I took seemed to lead me deeper into the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, watching from the shadows just beyond my headlights. My phone had no signal. The truck stop was gone, as if it never existed. I'm still driving. I don't know where I am, and I can't find a way out. It was a quiet night when I pulled into the truck stop. Too quiet. No other trucks, no movement, just the wind howling across the lot. The gas station was closed, but I was desperate for some shut-eye, so I decided to park and sleep for a few hours. I was halfway through my meal when I heard it, a soft scratching sound like nails dragging across metal. I froze, my sandwich halfway to my mouth, listening. It stopped. I told myself it was probably just the wind. But then it started again, louder this time. Something was at the back of my trailer. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check. The beam flickered in the darkness, revealing nothing at first. But then, as I rounded the corner of my truck, I saw it, handprints, hundreds of them, smeared across the trailer's doors as if someone or something had been trying to get in. I ran back to the cab, locked the doors, and didn't sleep a wink. The scratching started again around 3 a.m., but I never dared to look. By dawn, the handprints were gone. The marks on my mind, they'll never fade.
I'm gonna pop some tags, only got $20 in my pocket.